In February 2020, the small, quiet town of Blountville, Tennessee, was thrust into the national spotlight when an Amber Alert was issued for a missing 15-month-old girl named Evelyn Mae Boswell. She wasn't just another child lost in a big city. She was a wide-eyed baby with a heart-melting smile, whose disappearance would soon unravel one of the most disturbing stories in modern American true crime. From the moment Evelyn's picture began circulating, her innocence struck a nerve with the public. She looked like hope, like laughter, like every child we instinctively want to protect. But the deeper the case went, the more it became clear. This wasn't a story about a stranger's crime. This was something much darker, something closer, something far more sinister. And it all pointed back to the one person who should have been her guardian angel, her own mother, Megan Boswell. At just 18 years old, Megan Boswell was still a teenager herself, navigating young adulthood and the responsibilities of motherhood. But behind the surface of her carefully curated image was a deeply troubling history. Raised in a fractured home, surrounded by unstable relationships, and with a reputation for dishonesty even before the tragedy unfolded, Megan was far from the nurturing mother she appeared to be in photographs. Those who knew her described a girl who was manipulative, self-centered, and often estranged from the truth. And yet, no one could have imagined she was capable of what would eventually come to light. When Evelyn was first reported missing, it had already been weeks since anyone had last seen her. Weeks. That alone raised immediate red flags. A mother who had gone nearly 2 months without alerting anyone that her toddler had vanished? That was more than suspicious. It was chilling. When Megan finally spoke to police, the lies began almost instantly. Her stories shifted each time she was interviewed. One moment she claimed Evelyn was with her father. The next, she said the baby had been taken by a babysitter. Then she mentioned giving Evelyn to someone she trusted. But every path she pointed investigators down turned out to be a dead end. Her words weren't just inconsistent, they were misleading on purpose. And while the world was desperately searching for Evelyn, Megan's behavior remained cold, emotionless, even indifferent. She gave interviews with dry eyes, offered no urgency, and at times seemed more concerned about clearing her own name than finding her daughter. Law enforcement grew frustrated. The public grew angry. And behind closed doors, detectives began to suspect that the answers they were looking for might not be found outside, but rather within the walls of Megan's own life. Across Tennessee, volunteers scoured wooded areas, ditches, and back roads. Candlelight vigils were held in Evelyn's honor. News crews broadcast updates daily, hoping for a breakthrough. But with every passing hour, that sliver of hope began to fade. The country was watching, praying, and waiting for the miracle of a safe return. And yet, the very woman who should have been leading the charge, Evelyn's own mother, was doing the unthinkable, standing in the way. Her calculated deception not only hindered the investigation, it wasted precious time. Time that could have been spent finding Evelyn. Time that could have changed everything. And that's when the horrifying realization began to settle in. The danger Evelyn faced may not have come from a stranger at all. It may have come from the very person who gave her life. This wasn't just a missing child case. This was the slow, shocking unraveling of a mother's mask. A mask that concealed something no one wanted to believe could be true. Megan Boswell wasn't some desperate parent caught in a nightmare. She was the architect of it. The public watched in horror as Megan's lies were picked apart, one by one. And each lie took us closer to the truth. An unbearable truth that still echoes through the halls of justice and the hearts of parents everywhere. Evelyn Mae Boswell was a beautiful baby who deserved laughter, love, and a chance at life. What she got instead was silence, deception, and betrayal. This documentary is not just about the search for a missing child. It is a journey into the mind of a woman who turned motherhood into a weapon. a woman who broke the most sacred human bond, that of a mother and child. Evelyn's story is a reminder of how evil can wear a familiar face, and how trust can be shattered by those we rely on most. This is the haunting beginning of a tale that shocked the nation and broke countless hearts. This is My Monster Mother, The Despicable Crimes of Megan Boswell. Because sometimes the monsters we fear the most don't come from outside. They live inside our homes, and they smile. Before the world knew her name in the worst possible way, Megan Boswell was just another young woman growing up in rural Tennessee. Born in 2001, Megan lived what many would call a troubled life from the beginning. Raised in a broken home with limited stability and conflicting parental figures, her childhood was marked by dysfunction, strained relationships, and emotional chaos. Her parents separated early, and the lack of consistent support systems left a noticeable impact. Teachers and classmates later recalled her as someone who struggled with honesty, responsibility, and maturity. She often lied, exaggerated stories, and craved attention, sometimes at the expense of others. Megan wasn't known for warmth or emotional depth. Instead, she had a reputation for manipulating those around her to suit her own needs, no matter how small or significant the situation. As a teenager, Megan's life took an even more complicated turn when she became pregnant with Evelyn Mae Boswell. Just 17 at the time, she was still in high school and far from ready for the immense responsibility of motherhood. Those around her expressed concern, not only about her young age, but also about her unstable behavior, emotional immaturity, and volatile relationships. She was on and off with Evelyn's father, Ethan Perry, a young man who had joined the military and was mostly absent. With him away and her own home environment chaotic, Megan was left to care for Evelyn under circumstances many would describe as unstable at best. Reports would later show that Evelyn bounced between family members, sometimes with Megan, sometimes not, depending on where Megan was staying or who she was getting along with at the time. Despite social media posts that painted a picture of a happy young mother, the reality was far different. Megan often used Facebook and Instagram to curate an image of her life that didn't match the truth. She portrayed herself as a loving mom, even referring to Evelyn as her world. But behind closed doors, her priorities seemed drastically different. She was more concerned with seeking male attention, navigating toxic relationships, and dodging personal responsibility than providing her daughter with the stable, nurturing environment she deserved. To those paying attention, Megan's life was full of contradictions. Affectionate posts one day, erratic decisions the next. She would sometimes leave Evelyn in the care of others for days, with little explanation, and would rarely show genuine concern for her well-being. The most telling sign of Megan's character came not in a single moment, but in a pattern, an undeniable consistency of lies, manipulations, and selfish decisions. She lied about her education, her employment, her relationships, and later, most tragically, about her daughter's whereabouts. Those close to the family revealed that Megan had long viewed Evelyn more as a prop than a person, a way to get sympathy, attention, or even housing from others. She would use Evelyn when it was convenient and disappear when things got difficult. It was as if motherhood was something she wanted to wear as a title, but never truly embody with action. She liked the image of being a good mom, but she never lived it. Megan Boswell wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. She wasn't loud, aggressive, or violent in public. She didn't have a criminal record or a history of substance abuse. But her darkness was more insidious. It lived in the small choices she made every day, the indifference to her daughter's needs, the manipulation of those around her, and the staggering ability to lie without remorse. The Megan that the public saw on camera, soft-spoken, emotionless, calm, was the same Megan who had already hidden the truth about her daughter for weeks. And that duality, that quiet coldness, is what made her so terrifying. Because the greatest danger doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it smiles at you and calls itself Mom. In this part of our story, we begin to understand not just what Megan Boswell did, but who she truly was. The signs were there. The warnings were present. But no one could have imagined the evil that was growing behind that carefully constructed mask. Megan wasn't just a struggling young mother. She was something else entirely. A woman who was about to become the central figure in one of the most tragic and despicable cases of maternal betrayal the world has ever seen. Before the lies, before the headlines, before the horror, there was Evelyn. Evelyn Mae Boswell was born on November 21st, 2018. A healthy, bright-eyed baby girl with soft blonde curls, porcelain skin, and a smile that could melt the coldest heart. She didn't ask for fame. She didn't ask for the chaos that would define her short life. All she wanted, like every child, was love, safety, and the chance to grow up in a world that cherished her. But from the very beginning, the cards were stacked against her. Born to a teenage mother who was emotionally unprepared and surrounded by instability, Evelyn entered a world where she would become a silent victim long before anyone realized it. Those who were lucky enough to spend time with Evelyn describe her as a joyful baby, sweet, expressive, and full of wonder. She loved to laugh. Her eyes lit up when she heard music, and she had a giggle that could fill a room with warmth. Even at just over a year old, Evelyn had a personality that shined. She was affectionate, curious, and always reaching for the people around her. But behind that innocence was a life filled with confusion and inconsistency. She lived between homes, sometimes with Megan, sometimes passed off to relatives or friends. There was no routine, no sense of stability. Megan's erratic behavior meant Evelyn's daily life was often uncertain, with little structure or long-term care. Despite this, Evelyn formed strong bonds with those who truly cared for her. Her grandparents, especially her paternal side, adored her. They would later become some of the loudest voices demanding justice, unable to comprehend how such a precious child could simply vanish. They remembered the way Evelyn would cling to them, the way she would mimic sounds, how she loved to be held and rocked to sleep. To them, she was not a headline. She was a soul, a daughter, a granddaughter, a heartbeat. They fought tirelessly to find her, not just to know what happened, but to honor her short life with the dignity she deserved. And yet, while so many loved her, Evelyn remained defenseless against the one person who should have been her first protector, her mother. The very one who should have shielded her from harm, who should have placed her needs above all else, became the source of her suffering. Evelyn couldn't speak for herself. She couldn't cry out for help loud enough to be heard beyond the walls she lived in. All she had were her cries, her tiny hands, her fragile body, and a silent hope that someone would notice. But no one came in time. When the public first saw Evelyn's picture, they saw a baby who deserved the world. A little girl who had just started walking, who should have been babbling her first words, chasing butterflies in a backyard, laughing over peekaboo games and blowing out birthday candles. Instead, her life was hidden, her story controlled, her truth silenced by the very person responsible for nurturing it. By the time the Amber Alert was issued, Evelyn had already been gone for weeks. And the worst part? No one had noticed. No school had called. No doctor had asked. No system had caught it. Evelyn had fallen through every crack, forgotten not by fate, but by failure. Evelyn's story is not just tragic. It is a glaring reminder of how vulnerable children are in a world where evil can wear the face of a parent. She was not old enough to defend herself, to run away, or even to say what was wrong. Her life was in the hands of a mother who treated her not as a human being, but as an object, something to be used, hidden, or discarded depending on convenience. Evelyn's murder was not just a crime, it was an act of ultimate betrayal. A betrayal so deep that it shook the entire country. But Evelyn is more than a victim. She is a symbol, a reminder that every child matters, that every child deserves to be seen, heard, and protected, especially from those who claim to love them. As we continue to unfold this devastating case, let us remember that at the heart of it is not just Megan Boswell's cruelty, but Evelyn Mae Boswell's innocence. A baby who never got to grow up. A little girl who should still be here, smiling, laughing, living. The story of Evelyn Mae Boswell's disappearance isn't just heartbreaking. It's maddening. Not only because a 15-month-old child vanished without a trace, but because of the sheer delay and deception that followed. Evelyn wasn't reported missing on the day she disappeared. Not the next day, not even the next week. In fact, by the time law enforcement was notified, Evelyn hadn't been seen by anyone outside of Megan Boswell for more than 2 whole months. That detail alone sent shockwaves across the nation. How could a baby disappear and no one know? How could a mother remain silent? How does a child just vanish into thin air? How could a mother remain silent? How does a child just vanish into thin air? The official Amber Alert was issued on February 18, 2020. But it would later be discovered that the last confirmed sighting of Evelyn was around mid-December 2019. That 2-month gap became the most disturbing part of the early investigation. The person who reported Evelyn missing wasn't even Megan herself. It was her own mother, Evelyn's grandmother, Angela Boswell, and she didn't do it out of pure concern. The entire situation began to unravel after Angela and her boyfriend were arrested in North Carolina, driving a stolen BMW that Megan had suspiciously claimed was gifted. During questioning, it became clear no one had seen Evelyn in weeks. And that's when the alarm was finally sounded. Megan's lies weren't just hurtful, they were dangerous. They had hidden the truth for months. Once the alert went public, Megan Boswell stepped forward. But instead of pleading for her daughter's safe return, she began spinning a twisted web of stories. In interview after interview, her explanations changed, wildly and without logic. She initially claimed Evelyn was with her biological father, Ethan Perry, a military serviceman stationed in another state. That claim was quickly debunked when authorities confirmed Ethan hadn't seen Evelyn in months and had no custody of the child. Then Megan shifted her story again. This time, she said Evelyn had been given to a babysitter. Later, that babysitter became a mysterious family friend. Each time police asked for contact information or locations, Megan stalled, backtracked, or refused to cooperate. These weren't simple misunderstandings. These were intentional deceptions. Megan's statements became so inconsistent that the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office took the unusual step of publicly stating that the mother was providing false information and significantly hindering the investigation. While the public and authorities searched desperately for Evelyn, Megan remained cold and cryptic, refusing to explain where her daughter was or why she hadn't reported her missing sooner. Her behavior wasn't that of a frantic, grieving mother. It was something else entirely. Something calculated. Something terrifying. The media took notice, and soon, Megan Boswell became a household name. But not as a victim. As a suspect. As a puzzle no one could quite figure out. Her calm demeanor, her rehearsed-sounding interviews, and her bizarre contradictions created a storm of suspicion. She claimed she didn't want to take a polygraph test because she was pregnant, another lie later disproved by medical professionals. She cried, but her eyes stayed dry. She spoke of Evelyn, but always vaguely, never with the raw emotion of a heartbroken parent. And while the world waited for answers, Megan kept everyone at arm's length, holding tightly to her secrets. Each new twist in Megan's narrative pushed Evelyn further from being found. While investigators followed countless false leads and the public grew more desperate, Megan seemed to revel in the attention, offering crumbs of hope only to rip them away with her next lie. It wasn't just manipulation. It was cruelty. Every wasted day meant Evelyn's chances of being found alive slipped further away. This was no longer just a case of a missing child. It had become a disturbing psychological game, controlled by a mother whose lies were as alarming as her silence. The disappearance of Evelyn Mae Boswell marked the beginning of a nightmare. But it was Megan's lies, layered, calculated, and cold, that pulled everyone into the darkness. and the question on everyone's mind grew louder with each passing day. Where was Evelyn? And what had Megan done? As Megan Boswell continued to feed investigators an ever-changing stream of lies, a wave of urgency began to sweep across Sullivan County, and then across the entire state of Tennessee. The news of baby Evelyn Mae Boswell's disappearance hit the public hard. Her face, those big blue eyes and innocent smile, was now a symbol of desperation, confusion, and heartbreak. Law enforcement, media outlets, and community members launched into action with one shared mission: bring Evelyn home. Despite the late start to the search, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, TBI, the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office, and federal authorities moved swiftly. From the moment the Amber Alert went live on February 18, 2020, thousands of tips began pouring in. People across the region kept their eyes open at gas stations, motels, restaurants, and on rural roads. Search teams combed through fields, creeks, barns, and wooded areas. Investigators tracked down every lead Megan offered, even though many of them would later be proven false. Still, officers refused to give up. No matter how small the chance, they kept looking. Helicopters circled. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Drones scanned forested areas from above. Police teams worked around the clock, day and night, because they knew what was at stake. Evelyn was just a baby. She couldn't run. She couldn't hide. She couldn't call for help. If she was out there, time was critical. And yet, despite all their efforts, the frustration kept mounting. Every time they thought they might be getting closer to the truth, Megan Boswell moved the goalpost, changing her story, shifting blame, inventing new characters. She treated the investigation like a game, not a life-or-death emergency. Her lack of cooperation infuriated law enforcement and devastated the community. But what Megan didn't count on was the sheer power of a united public. Thousands of people, strangers, rallied around Evelyn. Volunteers held prayer vigils and candlelight marches. Posters were hung on every lamppost, bulletin board, and storefront. Social media became a relentless engine of awareness, with Evelyn's photo being shared across the country. Her name trended on Twitter. Her story sparked debates about child protection laws, mandatory welfare checks, and the failures of systems that should have noticed her absence sooner. Evelyn's case didn't just touch hearts. It ignited anger, grief, and an overwhelming desire for answers. Meanwhile, the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office continued to press Megan for the truth. Each new interrogation chipped away at her carefully constructed wall of lies, but she refused to give in. Detectives knew by now that Evelyn was likely not with a babysitter, not with her father, and not in any of the places Megan had suggested. But without a body, without physical evidence, they had no idea where to focus their efforts. They searched ponds, they drained creeks, they looked under mobile homes and inside old barns. The investigation was massive, but the heartbreak grew heavier with each passing day. Local residents described a heavy cloud that settled over their community, an invisible weight no one could shake. Parents hugged their children tighter. Teachers cried quietly in their classrooms. Police officers went home exhausted, knowing that every night Evelyn wasn't found made her chances of survival slimmer. Yet the hope, though faint, remained. Somewhere people believed that baby was out there, waiting to be found. But deep down, others had already begun to fear the worst. The most infuriating part was that the one person who held the answers, Megan Boswell, refused to say a word that mattered. Her calm demeanor was disturbing. Her detachment from the truth was unbearable. Her refusal to show even the slightest sign of maternal urgency became its own form of cruelty. And yet, detectives refused to give up, because Evelyn deserved to be found. She deserved the world to know where she was, what had happened, and why. The search for Evelyn wasn't just about finding a child. It became a symbol of justice, a fight against silence, against lies, and against the unimaginable idea that a mother could betray her baby in such a horrific way. Megan Boswell thought she could control the narrative. But what she didn't realize was this: the world wasn't looking away. They were watching, and they weren't going to stop until they found the truth. As the days passed and the lies continued, it became painfully obvious to investigators. Megan Boswell wasn't searching for her daughter. She was hiding something. For weeks, law enforcement bent over backward trying to validate Megan's claims. They chased down phantom babysitters, knocked on doors in counties Megan mentioned offhand, and retraced a trail that seemed intentionally designed to go nowhere. Her ever-changing stories weren't just frustrating, they were cruel distractions. Each new version took precious hours and days away from the investigation. And when the trail consistently led back to nothing, detectives knew they weren't dealing with a grieving mother. They were staring down a suspect. On February 25th, 2020, 1 week after the Amber Alert was issued, Megan Boswell was arrested, not for harming her daughter, not yet, but for something that speaks volumes about her role in this tragedy: making false statements to police. At that point, she had given so many contradictory stories that investigators had reached a breaking point. She was officially charged with multiple counts of providing false information to law enforcement, and it was clear that Megan wasn't just uncooperative. She was deliberately obstructing the search for her own child. What made her arrest so chilling wasn't just the charge, it was her demeanor. As she was taken into custody, Megan looked emotionless. Not hysterical, not broken, not terrified, just calm, measured, cold. Even the most seasoned detectives found her behavior deeply unsettling. There were no desperate pleas for help, no begging to be released so she could keep looking for Evelyn. There was no mention of Evelyn at all. And that silence was deafening. At the press conference following her arrest, Sullivan County Sheriff Jeff Cassidy didn't mince words. He openly stated that Megan Boswell had been untruthful throughout the investigation and that her lies were delaying justice for Evelyn. The public, which had once viewed Megan as a struggling young mother, now began to see her in a different light, not as a victim of circumstance, but as the architect of a carefully constructed nightmare. Even more disturbing were the revelations that came to light after her arrest. Megan had claimed she didn't take a polygraph because she was pregnant. Yet, once in custody, medical evaluations showed she wasn't. It was just another calculated lie, another tactic to stall investigators and manipulate the narrative. Every false statement made it harder to believe anything she said. Every detail that was disproven only tightened the circle around her. While in jail, Megan showed no signs of emotional collapse, no remorse, no urgency. She didn't plead for updates on Evelyn. She didn't ask if any leads had turned up. Her focus, it seemed, was entirely on herself. Even in court appearances, she appeared more concerned with her appearance and her rights than with the child she claimed to love. The emotional disconnect was almost inhuman. Behind the scenes, law enforcement was doubling down. Search warrants were issued, digital records were pulled, surveillance footage was examined. And slowly, they began piecing together a chilling timeline that would point to something no one wanted to accept: that Evelyn Mae Boswell was likely never going to be found alive, and that Megan Boswell, her own mother, knew exactly why. Megan's arrest marked a turning point in the case. The focus was no longer just about finding Evelyn. It was about exposing the truth Megan had buried under lies. It was about breaking through the wall she had built with manipulation, deceit, and emotional detachment. The justice system was no longer treating her as a grieving parent. Now she was a suspect under a microscope. Every word she had ever said, every move she had made, was being dissected. This was no longer just a search. It was the beginning of a criminal case. One that would expose not only what happened to Evelyn, but also the chilling depths of her mother's betrayal. Megan Boswell was no longer just the face of a tragedy. She was becoming the face of a crime. For weeks, the community held its breath, clinging to the fading hope that Evelyn Mae Boswell might still be alive. Search teams refused to stop. Volunteers refused to give up. Her face, bright and innocent, remained etched in the public's consciousness. But behind the scenes, investigators were preparing for what they feared all along: a recovery mission, not a rescue. And on March 6th, 2020, that fear became devastating reality. After weeks of deceptive interviews, endless false leads, and exhausting man-hours, authorities finally received the tip they needed. It wasn't from Megan Boswell. It wasn't from a stranger. It came from their own relentless investigative work, cross-referencing digital data, phone records, and behavioral patterns. That information led them to a deeply disturbing location: a family property on Muddy Creek Road in Sullivan County. It was a place Megan knew well, a rural piece of land that belonged to a relative, a place she had access to, a place she never once mentioned in any of her stories. When officers arrived, they began to search the outbuildings, sheds, and wooded surroundings. What they discovered inside a small storage shed would change the case and the community forever. Hidden in a trash bin, beneath blankets, clothing, and toys, were the remains of Evelyn Mae Boswell. She had been there the entire time, alone, abandoned, hidden like garbage. The shock of the discovery rippled instantly. Detectives on the scene wept. Seasoned crime scene investigators, men and women who had seen the worst humanity had to offer, struggled to process what they had just uncovered. A baby's body, discarded by the person meant to love her most, left in silence for months while the world searched. Megan Boswell hadn't just lied. She had buried the truth, both literally and emotionally. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, confirming what many had begun to fear. This was no recent tragedy. Evelyn had likely died around the same time she was last seen in December. For 3 full months, her tiny body remained in that shed, undetected and unmourned, while her mother spun stories and stalled investigators. The toys and clothes surrounding her weren't a sign of affection. They were a grotesque attempt to make it look like she had once been cared for, or worse, to distract from the cruelty of what had been done. News of the discovery broke immediately. A press conference was held. Sheriff Jeff Cassidy, his voice heavy with emotion, confirmed what no one wanted to hear. Evelyn was gone. She had been dead for months. The Amber Alert was canceled. The search was over. And the grief that followed was unimaginable. Across Tennessee, a collective heartbreak was felt. Candlelight vigils turned into memorials. Flowers, stuffed animals, and handwritten notes flooded the gates of the property where she was found. Strangers sobbed openly. Parents hugged their children tighter. And everyone asked the same questions. How could a mother do this? Why didn't she tell someone? Why hide her own baby? But there were no answers. Only a hollow silence. Megan Boswell did not offer a confession. She did not explain herself. She remained in custody, emotionless, refusing to take responsibility for what she had done. And while the cause of death was not immediately revealed to the public, the manner of her death was ruled homicide. The little girl who once brought smiles to those around her had died alone, and her body had been hidden by the one person who should have moved heaven and earth to protect her. The discovery of Evelyn's body wasn't just the darkest chapter in this case. It was a final, brutal punctuation mark on a story filled with betrayal, manipulation, and evil. It answered the question everyone had been afraid to ask, but it left behind even more. How long had Megan planned this? What truly happened that day? And how do you find justice for someone who never even had a voice? As the legal system began preparing for what would become a long and painful prosecution, one thing became certain. Evelyn Mae Boswell's short life would not be forgotten. Though her mother buried her body in a storage bin, the world would remember her face, her name, and the horrific betrayal that stole her future. The little girl in the pink dress was no longer missing, but the sorrow left behind would echo for years to come. With the discovery of Evelyn Mae Boswell's body, the focus of the case shifted from search to justice. The world was no longer asking, "Where is Evelyn?" They were asking, What will happen to Megan Boswell now? In the days that followed the horrifying recovery of Evelyn's remains, investigators tightened their case and began building what would become a mountain of legal evidence against the child's own mother. The world had watched in disbelief as Megan's lies had derailed the investigation. But now, there would be no more distractions, no more contradictions. Now, it was time to hold her accountable for the murder of her daughter. On August 19th, 2020, after months of forensic work and careful investigation, a grand jury indicted Megan Boswell on 19 criminal counts, including 2 counts of felony murder, child abuse, child neglect, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, making false reports, and more. It was a legal avalanche, and every charge reflected a chilling piece of the puzzle, each one a window into what Evelyn had endured. Among the most serious were the felony murder charges, which carried the possibility of life imprisonment. Megan Boswell now stood accused not just of lying to police, but of killing her own daughter and hiding the body in a calculated attempt to escape responsibility. The prosecution made it clear from the start, this would not be a simple case. They weren't just trying to prove negligence or poor parenting. They were preparing to argue that Megan intentionally took Evelyn's life, then systematically misled authorities to cover it up. Behind closed doors, prosecutors were combing through text messages, cell phone records, surveillance footage, and social media posts to build a timeline. They traced Megan's movements. They examined her internet searches. They even looked at her purchases, everything from cleaning supplies to baby items, to understand exactly what had happened in the days surrounding Evelyn's death. In response, Megan's defense attorneys attempted to position her as a confused and scared young mother who never meant for any of this to happen. They requested mental evaluations, suggesting she might not be competent to stand trial. A psychological assessment was ordered by the court, and though the results were not publicly released in full, it was confirmed that Megan was found competent to face prosecution. The defense could no longer hide behind excuses of mental instability. The case would move forward, and Megan would face a jury of her peers. Public reaction to the indictment was fierce. Many saw the charges as long overdue. Social media erupted with outrage, sorrow, and anger. People demanded the harshest punishment possible. Others called for deeper investigations into how a child could go missing for months before anyone even noticed. Evelyn's case sparked renewed calls for reform in child welfare systems and accountability in parental oversight. For many, Megan wasn't just a murderer. She was a symbol of a broken system that had failed to protect a helpless child. In court, Megan Boswell appeared stoic, almost detached. She pled not guilty to all charges, even as the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence that her actions, before and after Evelyn's death, were deliberate, deceptive, and damning. As pretrial hearings continued, a troubling portrait of Megan's life was laid bare. Her history of dishonesty, her erratic behavior, her selfish decisions. Prosecutors pointed to a pattern, one where Evelyn had been neglected, used as leverage, and ultimately discarded. This was not the story of a grieving mother. It was the story of a calculated killer who valued her freedom more than her child's life. The legal fallout extended beyond the courtroom. Megan's family members were placed under scrutiny. How much did they know? Why hadn't they raised concerns earlier? Were there warning signs that could have saved Evelyn? These questions lingered heavily in the air, and while no additional charges were filed against relatives, the shadow of Evelyn's death stretched over everyone who had played a role in her short, tragic life. As the trial approached, one chilling truth remained. Evelyn's voice would never be heard in court. She couldn't testify. She couldn't describe what happened. But the evidence would speak for her. The remains, the lies, the digital footprints, and the cold silence from the one person who should have spoken the truth from day one. Megan Boswell's trial would become more than a legal proceeding. It would be a reckoning. A battle between justice and cruelty, between truth and lies. And at the heart of it all was Evelyn Mae Boswell, a baby who never had a chance, and whose tiny life now depended on the court to deliver what her mother never gave her: justice. As the criminal case against Megan Boswell gained traction, a tidal wave of media attention surged across the nation. What began as a heartbreaking Amber Alert in a quiet Tennessee town had now become a headline-making horror story that captivated and infuriated millions. The Evelyn Boswell case wasn't just news. It was a national obsession. From local stations in Blountville to major national networks like CNN, ABC, and Dateline, every outlet wanted answers. Every journalist wanted the story. But what truly fueled the media frenzy wasn't just the tragedy. It was the shocking betrayal at its core. The narrative was almost too disturbing to comprehend. A teenage mother accused of murdering her baby, hiding the body, and then fabricating weeks of lies while the world searched. It struck a raw nerve. Evelyn wasn't just another missing child. She became a symbol of innocence destroyed by the very person meant to protect her. And as more details surfaced, the outrage only grew. News anchors choked back tears reporting on Evelyn's recovery. True crime podcasts launched multi-episode specials. Online communities formed rapidly, with hundreds of thousands joining Facebook groups dedicated to following the case, demanding justice, and honoring Evelyn's memory. The public's outrage was fueled not only by the horror of the crime, but by the failure of accountability. How, people asked, could Megan lie so openly and for so long without being stopped? How could no one notice Evelyn was missing for nearly 2 months? Where were the safety nets? Where were the signs? The backlash wasn't just against Megan Boswell. It was against a system that allowed her to disappear without a trace. CPS, extended family, neighbors, everyone came under scrutiny. Social media exploded with anger. Hashtags like #Justice for Evelyn, #Say Her Name, and #Protect. The innocent trended for weeks. Evelyn's image, the bright eyes, the soft curls, the baby smile, was everywhere. Candlelight vigils were held in her name across the country. Strangers left stuffed animals, flowers, and handwritten letters outside the property where her body was found. Some wrote prayers, others wrote apologies, sorrowful messages to a child they had never met, mourning a life lost to betrayal and neglect. In a world desensitized to tragedy, Evelyn broke through. She reminded people that behind every statistic, every headline, is a human soul. And her story haunted them. The media also focused heavily on Megan Boswell's behavior. Footage of her emotionless court appearances was replayed over and over. Analysts dissected her body language, her voice, her history. She became a chilling figure in the public's imagination. Not just a defendant, but a monster cloaked in the familiar face of motherhood. Her apparent lack of remorse was broadcast alongside the heart-wrenching grief of Evelyn's extended family, especially her paternal grandparents, who had publicly begged for answers. The contrast was stark and devastating. Talk shows, crime documentaries, and legal panels debated every development in the case. Was Megan capable of premeditated murder? Should Tennessee introduce new laws for mandatory child wellness checks? Could more have been done? Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a theory. And behind every headline was one unshakable truth. The world had failed Evelyn Mae Boswell. Amidst the media storm, another tragedy began to unfold. The erosion of public trust. Trust in the system. Trust in caregivers. Trust in the very institutions that are supposed to protect the most vulnerable. Megan's actions weren't just criminal. They were personal to people everywhere. Mothers, fathers, teachers, and grandparents all looked inward, questioning how someone could betray a child so completely. How a mother could smile while lying. How she could walk free for weeks knowing exactly where her daughter lay. Cold, alone, and forgotten. This wasn't just a story that faded from the headlines. It lived on in documentaries, court coverage, and online forums. Evelyn's name became a call to action. People demanded stronger protections for children, tighter laws on reporting, and greater accountability for caregivers. Evelyn became the heartbreaking proof that evil can exist where love should live, and that no community, no matter how small or quiet, is immune to it. In the end, the media frenzy surrounding the Evelyn Boswell case wasn't about sensationalism. It was about truth. It was about outrage. And it was about giving a voice to the voiceless. Evelyn couldn't speak for herself, but the world made sure she would never be silenced again. As the long-awaited trial approached, the courtrooms of Sullivan County filled with a tension that had been building for over a year. The story of Evelyn Mae Boswell had haunted the nation, and now, the people waited to see if justice would finally be served. For many, this wasn't just a trial. It was a moral reckoning. The question wasn't whether Megan Boswell had lied. That had been proven many times over. The question was far more chilling. Did she kill her own child? And if so, would the justice system have the strength to hold her fully accountable? The prosecution came prepared. They presented a harrowing timeline, backed by phone data, search records, witness statements, and forensic evidence. They painted a picture of a young mother who viewed her daughter not as a precious life, but as an inconvenience, someone who could be silenced when her presence no longer served a purpose. Every piece of evidence pointed to Megan's lies not just as misdirection, but as deliberate cover-up. The child's remains, hidden among toys and trash in a shed on a family property, spoke volumes about the coldness of the crime. This wasn't an accident. It was a burial of truth. In court, Megan Boswell remained eerily calm. She entered a plea of not guilty, maintaining her innocence as prosecutors detailed the graphic reality of her daughter's final moments. Her defense attorneys tried to cast doubt, to suggest that perhaps others in the family were involved, or that Megan had acted out of fear or confusion. But the jury, like the public, had seen too much, heard too much, to be swayed by soft words or evasive logic. On the day the verdict was read, the courtroom was packed. Tension hung thick in the air. Journalists, grieving family members, and strangers who had followed every turn of the case sat in silence. When the word "guilty" was spoken, it echoed like thunder. Guilty of felony murder. Guilty of aggravated child abuse. Guilty of tampering with evidence. One count after another, the weight of Megan's choices fell like bricks. The verdict was clear. She had taken Evelyn's life, and justice had finally caught up. The sentence was equally decisive. Life in prison, no parole, no second chances. The woman who once smiled into news cameras while weaving lies about her missing daughter would now spend the rest of her life behind bars. There would be no more manipulations, no more control. Only silence and a prison cell where Megan would have no one left to deceive but herself. But even with a guilty verdict and a life sentence, the question still remains. Is there ever true justice for a child like Evelyn? Can any verdict bring back the laughter that was lost, the milestones that will never come, or the innocence that was shattered? For the family and the countless people who came to love Evelyn from afar, the answer is bittersweet. Justice was served in the courtroom, yes, but the hole left behind by Evelyn's death is one that no conviction can fill. What this case leaves behind is more than heartbreak. It leaves behind a legacy, a reminder that we, as a society, must do better. We must see the signs. We must speak up. We must protect those who cannot protect themselves. Evelyn Mae Boswell is gone, but her story should never fade. She was more than a case file, more than a headline. She was a child, with dreams, with laughter, with life, and she mattered. So as the prison doors closed behind Megan Boswell, the world exhaled, not with relief, but with mourning. Mourning a future that was stolen, mourning a justice that came too late, and mourning the truth that sometimes the greatest monsters are the ones who smile and call themselves mother.